the session about defensive programming, which is quite a buzzword. It does not mean any particular set of technologies, more than like basically approaches to development. And I think that most of developers start using different kinds of defensive programming basically just at the time when they find out that something is quite problematic with the extension, with finding some bugs in the code. Then most of the developers will start using it even if they don't know it's called defensive programming. So was the defensive programming in the first? Okay, defense against impossible, because the impossible will happen. If you are developing for some time, you already know that this is quite true, because have you ever heard developer or yourself to say something like, this can be happening, this is impossible, this cannot happen, this error cannot be there, this value cannot be passed to this function, and things like that. That's quite common, and basically the idea is to prevent some bugs, or at least make easy to find these bugs once they happen. Because the larger system is, the harder is to find some specific bug, and if you have a lot of components, then trying to isolate the bug to a specific component is quite crucial. Okay, so I will just start with some few general recommendations. And then we will basically just dig into the code and start looking on the code before and after refactorization, using some kinds of defensive programming. So how to do defensive programming? Some general definition found on Wikipedia is to make code behave in a predictable manner despite unexpected inputs. This can be inputs from third-party API, this can be some user actions, this can be inputs from some other part of the system. The thing is, if you've got some component and it receives some unexpected or invalid input, it's good thing to find it as soon as possible, because if you don't find it soon, then this component can pass some invalid input to some another component, and then finding where the bug started, was the source, is quite hard. In most cases, it's better to file immediately than finding that something is inconsistent in your database, or there is some weird behavior reported by some users. But of course, there are different cases where you want the code to keep going, even if there is some invalid input, but you definitely want to know about it. So better than just hide some invalid data or some exception. Better is to log it and then investigate it, but do not affect user if it does not make sense. For example, if you've got some kind of system that, for example, delivers some kind of digital license with the email, and subsystem for delivering these licenses will fail, you can still say to customer that his order has been processed, but his license will be delivered later. But it's definitely not a good idea to just, for example, hide the exception because he will never receive the license until he writes to the support, or to just crash the whole site because one of the subsystems don't work. So another recommendation is to do not ignore errors and unexpected inputs, and do not trust other components. Just make sure that your component behaves exactly how it should behave, and if there's some unexpected input that your components don't know how to work with it, just don't ignore it. Do something about it. It can be logging error, it can be logging warning, it can be just some update of input. It can be basically anything, or throwing regular error to interrupt program execution. Quite important part of defensive programming is writing comprehensive, clean, and testable code. That's basically what the solid principles helps you. Solid principles helps you with, and having code that's easy to understand, that's easy to fix, easy to maintain, extend. That's basically one of the main aspects how you can keep your code base clean and bug free, and not just if you ever edit some feature, add some feature, fix some bug, and some completely different part of the application just broke that's not related to this, then you know there are some issues, and it can mean that the code base is not in very good shape. Okay, so now I will switch to Visual Studio Code, and I will just show you a lot of examples, about 10 examples of different parts of code before and after refactoring. Some of the parts of the codes are from the Actum project. Some of the code is from some other project, from some open source project, from my projects. So it has been updated, so it's easier to read. But I try to keep the core root causes inside the code. So we'll just dig into it. Please don't feel offended if you see your own code. I've got my code there too. Okay, so the first sample is related to the validation. Imagine you've got code like this. It's just some simple class that sends SMS. It sends some secret code like two-factor authentication codes to the customer. You probably know already from the name of the file if you can read it. But can anybody tell me what's wrong with this code, or what can be changed to behave more defensive?
There could be a null reference exception.
Basically, this is quite simple. The biggest problem for me is that you can easily validate if the SMS sender is null or not in the constructor, which is something that can happen. For example, you can have some invalid configuration of your dependency injection container, or you just miss something, or you just make some simple error and you send the SMS sender instance as a null reference. And application can start, but with the first SMS trying to send, it will fail a null reference exception here. So there's no reason why you cannot check the input immediately when the instance is created. And this is not about just one class. The most problems come with having multiple services nested. So for example, this code sender is part of some other service that provides, for example, registration process that's part of some other service. And basically the top service you are using, you just call some method and it will fail somewhere deep in the call stack on some null reference exception, which makes finding errors quite hard. So the idea behind this is to extend it and just add some validation. In the beginning, I've got just validation in the constructor, and here I've got validation of sending empty code and sending to the empty number. If I will send it to the empty number, it will probably fail in the SMS sender itself, but also the validating of the code is also a good idea, because sending empty code to the customer will probably is probably not valid at all, so we can validate it immediately. Better than if your customer calls you that he received the SMS with the empty code, and then you try to find out what happened. If you've got like this, it will maybe show error to the customer, but you can be, for example, notified with your logging system, and you can start to solving issue right away. Also, if the customer will receive on the web page some 500 internal server error. A lot of people are used to it. I mean, like, if you receive the error, it means, okay, they are deploying something, there is some temporary issue, I will try it later. But if you receive the empty code in your SMS, you will try to enter it, it will not work, and in the general, we will get more frustrated than just if server gives you an internal error. Okay, another example is using the switch or basically using some ifs, some branches with some enums. This does not necessarily needs to be wrong, but do you get idea how to change this code to be more defensive?
User state is structure or it's class?
It's enum.
We are setting a permission, and by default, I would say that it should be disabled.
It is by default disabled, but if I will show you, because this is not like it needs to be wrong to use it like this, but for example, if you are using these kind of states, I prefer to explicitly state all the states, and then using exception in case you are using some, for example, new state that has been introduced. Because in case you are introducing new state, you should update all codes that somehow transfers this state or converts this states to something else.
That's why switch is bad in any case. Like.
Yeah, but in this case, the switch is good.
No.
Yeah.
Why?
Because if you will use dictionary, it will be much more easier to extend it. And like switch, in any case, is making your code much more harder to support and so on. So it's
yeah.
better approach not to use switch if it is like completely impossible to go with it. And
Well,
there's
to be honest, I would not say that the switch is bad thing. There are cases when using the enum can be bad thing. For better case will be maybe to describe the user state with some class that defines all the properties on it. So in that case, it would be just like user state can have directly property, can change password in this state or something like that. Okay.
I have one concern with this solution because it will mask if you add some new user state and you forget to reflect it.
Yeah.
It will mask it until you will execute this, and if it will be some code which is executed rarely, you will find it on the production that it's failed.
Yeah.
exactly.
From the functional point of view, the previous was better, I think.
Well, it's really about opinion and about how the code is used. But in a lot of cases, for example, this is not that big deal because in the original state we just returning false. But in some cases, you just want to be sure. Well, this is basically the defensive programming itself, because if you receive some new state, it will not fail. It will just use some default value, and this is more like the offensive programming, which is the sub branch of defensive programming, which will just fail in case of unexpected inputs. There are, of course, both ways possible, and then there can be, for example, some critical parts of code that will make more sense to use the exception in case of invalid input or unexpected input, and there are definitely scenarios when having default is okay. It's always on the consideration which one makes sense to you. Okay, let's look at the third example. This is, of course, it's really just part of the code, but this one caused some issues on production, and some really angry customers at the time. This was from the system when you've got some offer, and this offer defines some coupons for users, and each user can have some coupon defined, and this method was used to basically get coupon code for the specific user. And the user went to the for example, restaurant, bring the code, and the restaurant check it against some report and said, okay, your code is valid, and you can, for example, have this nice meal or something like that. And there was one quite a big problem that was not caused by this method, but if this method would be written in more defensive way, it would prevent it. Do you have idea what can it be in this case?
What is type of user? It is some class?
Yeah, it's some class.
So maybe the comparison between...
The comparison is okay. Just
I think it's not okay because IEnumerable cannot be null. Coupons everywhere will be some.
Can be now.
Can be now.
No, it's enumerable.
Reference.
Can
be now.
Yeah.
Okay, I will
The
check.
issue is that a list of coupons can contain several users interacting on the first one.
Yeah. Exactly. He just said we are checking for a first coupon, but there is not definition of what will happen in case there are more coupons. And this basically read the first coupon for the user, but the report that service providers get was somehow sorted differently, and so in some cases they got the different coupon. And there was some race condition that caused that for one user, in some cases there was defined two coupons, and one coupon was given to the user and one coupon was given to the service provider, and they just met at the store and they both got different coupon codes, and that caused quite a confusion. So what can be the solution for this? In this case, it's just switching to the single or default, because it will fail in case there are more coupons. Yes?
Maybe just on level of this, not sure, but if it's enumerable of classes, I can have the null in that enumerable, and in that case it will fail in that where condition. So
Yeah.
another point in the more safe version.
Yes, you can check it, but there is defensive programming and overly paranoid programming. It's not always clear definition where it starts. But for example, if the user can be null, then it will just throw an exception. I know it's not a good thing, but it means that there are some general. I cannot believe in consistency of data, which is something you should check. But you cannot check every null in your C# code. So in this case, I would keep it like this, because otherwise you will have like 10,000 ifs there.
Why accept IEnumerable when you need only one? It seems still very...
This is you just accepting the list of all coupons for some specific offer, and you just getting one for one specific user. Of course. Okay.
Is it necessary to validate coupons parameter? Because like, if there is no coupons, we just return null.
But no.
Well, that's exactly the difference between defensive and offensive programming, because if someone is asking for the coupon code and gives me the null enumerable, I guess that can be more like the error. If I just check if coupons equals null, then return null, it will probably hide an exception. Then the customers will start complaining, it don't give me any coupon even if I bought it, because there will be probably some error inside the code providing this enumerable. I guess empty enumerable is okay, but not definitely null. Okay, of course, this is not the root cause. This is just one small detail that can prevent this. Of course, if you want to fix this, you need to add some, for example, unique index to the coupon in the database, and of course, fix the bug in the synchronization that generates the coupons. In this case, it was a little bit more complicated, and the bug was caused by adding new features, because there was already some kind of unique index, but they added feature to have multiple coupons per one user, and there was some problem with the indexing, so that caused the duplicate. But in general, even this small detail can define not only prevents these issues, but this can also define the contract or what you are expecting from the data. Because if you are reading this code and you expecting single or default, that defines that this method don't want you to give the enumerable of coupons that contains more than one coupons for the user. So this is also like some documentation of the code, because you know that you are expecting exactly one or no. Okay, I will move to another one. You will maybe find out this one. This is called "The Road to the Hell is Paved with Good Intentions," and this is code that tries to filter some pre-computed data and then return the data by the filter. There was some. There is one rule, one if branch that checks if the data was there or not. Can you find out what can be wrong with this code? And
No reference exception.
okay, that's definitely one. It will fail in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it's better
Not
to check it.
On
But-
any, when it's called any, it will fail. If it will be null. There is two
No,
lists.
it's-
Yeah, I see.
it's-
Two
yeah,
lists.
So it's
Yeah,
like
two
my
lists.
previous
Yeah.
code, yeah,
Okay,
opposite.
you can definitely add
Yeah.
check to it,
No,
but
no,
on the
no,
other
no,
hand,
it's
it
okay.
will fail on the first line.
Yeah.
So it's quite okay. You cannot just have checked everywhere, but or you can, but there is some other error.
And you're doing away to what? To
Async, to list async.
Yeah, just to list.
It is not that.
no. In the end.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Just hide it like.
Predicate could be null.
Well, there is something a little bit different than just checking for nulls in this case.
What is source?
It's just some source.
field? Okay.
Of course, I need to strip the code a little bit to keep it in the one screen. But the basic problem is that if everything works as predicted, everything works fine because pins returns the values, returns the filtered items. But in case something's went wrong and the pins will return nothing, there is executed some method that will recompute everything from the source, which is very expensive, and it will basically overload your database server and your application server. So in this case, in basically all testing, everything's worked fine, because there was every time some response something in the pins collection, but in case the pre-computed values has been removed, then the compute from source has been executed every time this method was called, which caused really some performance troubles. So how to fix it? Better than just trying to do just in case, if you are writing your code just in case, you need to test it. You need to be sure that everyone's aware of this functionality. Otherwise, just do something like this. Just get the pre-computed values, filter it, and if there is none, you can block warning, but you don't need to do any additional steps just in case, because in this case it just breaks the production servers down.
And still no reference exception.
Yeah. But still, you will be able to find it quite. But you are right. There
So
can
when it will be recomputed?
that's some completely different code. But this method, by the name of the method, gets something pre-computed.
Okay,
It-
yeah, you're right.
That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, another code. This is code authenticate of some API method. I will just scroll down, and there are a few different things that's quite problematic. Fir-
How ticket could be null
Yeah,
because
sure.
you instantiated?
Yeah. There are a few different things, but can anyone tell me what this method exactly doing in like 20 seconds?
No.
No, definitely not.
Magic.
Okay, I've got two different problems with this method. First is I have absolutely no idea what it's doing, and second, the formatting is not that clear. In most cases, it's good to have just one way how your method is going, and not just splitting it to the different if-elses. If you're doing some validation, just check, and if something is not valid, then do some action. But otherwise, just continue method and not just create nested ifs. Similar problem is that there is definitely some kind of business logic. And if you've got some API service and this API service is doing some authentication, just write some service for it that will do it for you instead of just trying to do something just inside the API method. I will also show you how the method has been rewritten. And it's definitely less of the code because a lot of code has been removed to some other services. But there has been created service for authentication tickets. There has been created service for verification login, and there has been created some method that just reads some value in the same way from the user instance. And that's basically it. The big difference is that if you are the new developer and you are reported that something's wrong with this method, if the method is like this, and someone tells you, okay, I try username and password and they get these values, and it returns me that I'm not authenticated, you can find out, for example, that user info was null, this returned true, but this returned something different that returned some empty value or something like that. And in general, you don't know why that happened. What's the reason why the flow was like this, and if the flow was correct or not. In this case, you can just try to debug it, and you will find out that the first part of the code, it went through, so probably validation, authentication with the ticket is okay. Then it went here, but the verify user login returned null. So you can go inside this verify user login method and find out what's going on inside this method, and you can basically better and faster understand what's going on.
Where is the validation for username, password, and IST?
It's basically it can be there, but currently it's moved to this
But
services.
you can't trust another services based on defensive
Uh,
principle.
to be honest, I got there. The string dot is null or
Yeah,
empty.
you can't trust some remote services. In this case, our ticket service is some kind of abstraction for us. We don't know.
Yeah.
Does it do or not?
But I still don't understand the value. I can just check if it's null or not. But the real validation needs to be done by the authentication service. So, for example, if I change my mind and tell, okay, I want that authentication ticket can be empty string, I just need to update authentication ticket service and not just remove it from some other pre-validation. But it's really like, I'm not exactly sure if I would edit there or not. It maybe should there, maybe not. But that's definitely a valid point. Okay. Another piece of code is this method that will just read something from the third-party API, do some checks the cache, do some validation, and return the value. Any idea what can be tricky or what can be problematic with this part of code? Just have some time to sink it in.
Multi-access?
I will just start with some simple stuff. First thing that's really bothering me about this method is from the solid principles. There's a single responsibility pattern. That means that some class or some method should do only one thing. And this method is doing multiple things. It's doing basically some serialization. So if I want to change the type of serialization, I need to update methods that contains also some other code that can be quite specific for some situation. I would prefer to use some abstraction for serialization, and there is definitely some kind of caching logic. That if you, for example, want to do testable code, if you want to write testable code, you want to test this caching logic, it's quite hard because it's also in the method where you are contacting some proxy, you are doing some other validation and things like that. So I would definitely move the serialization, caching to some other parts. Also, the biggest problem is here that there is some validation, but the validation just defines if the value is stored to cache or not. It will not notify the caller if the return value is valid or not. It will return the invalid value as well. So if you want to check if the return value is valid or not, you need to do this check you need to do this validation again in the caller, or you just need to expect that everything will be okay, but there can be some error and it can cause some troubles. So this is called garbage in, garbage out. So if you receive some invalid data from the proxy from the API server that can, for example, contain empty result just with error, for example, server is on maintenance mode or something like that, then you just take it. You will not cache it, but you will pass it to the caller, and it can break some other things there. So what we can do with it? There are a few different things I would do. Simplest refactoring can be done like this. First, we will completely remove the caching from the method, because that should not be there. It should be somewhere, but it should not be together with a calling of proxy, with calling of API server. We just getting report data, and then we can use some validation. This validation we can use, I don't know, that's like the technical, that's the implementation detail. It can be some data annotations, or it can be some checking if something is null, or if the error message is not set, or anything else. And if there is any error, we can just throw an exception with the details of this error. And if anything goes wrong, we just catch it as an exception and throw it. We can wrap it to some kind of API exception. So if anything goes wrong with the reading data from the server, with the parsing data, with validation data from the server, we will just receive the API exception. And this exception will have, as a nested exception, the internal exception that can contain some more details. For example, if something goes wrong with the validation, it can contain details about what went wrong with the validation. If something goes wrong with the get report data, it can tell, for example, that the remote server has closed connection or something like that. And of course, we are not doing anything about, for example, logging request in a response, or doing anything with the API. This is just some method that helps us read the data, or throw API exception in case something goes wrong. And then I just write some helper method, get or set, that can be called, and it will just try to access the cache with some cache key, and if it's not there, it will just try to use this get report data method to get data and store it to the cache and return it. So I completely split it, caching and getting data. This does not even needs to be in the same class. Okay, so I will move to another example.
You can.
What?
It may suffer from the same thing as we occur with the many multiple requests and many get report data. If it takes longer, remember, as we count the number, it takes long, and many users came.
Yeah.
So it overload.
Definitely. What here means is that if there are a lot of requests at the same time, it will just execute a lot of requests to the API server. And when the first request is returned and stored to cache, then it will start to deliver data from cache. This is definitely true, but this is, for example, caching for single user access. But of course, if you've got some, there are definitely things that can be done about performance and synchronization. Also, this get or set method can have the implementation of synchronization. So this is basically not the context of this demo, but definitely a valid point. Okay, this is another problem that I saw in production code. Just to tell you, basically every sample I showed you today is from the production when it caused quite a lot of troubles, and it wasn't very easy to solve it in almost every case. Okay, this one is also nice. This is some code that adds callback to the timer, and this timer is executed every 30 seconds, and it communicates with some. In this case, it was some kind of hardware device, and data from hardware device has been read and stored to the database. And there was some issues. So they added try-catch block, and this try-catch block basically solved the issues because it would not break the application, but there was some other problems. There are different types of problems in this case. Can you tell me what can be problems?
Is that they didn't check if it is null or not.
Sorry?
API data, they didn't check if it is null or not.
Yes. Of course, we are not validating the data from the client. Definitely, that's the one thing.
We are not checking if the client is instantiated or.
Okay, in this case, it's inside some class. We've got API client defined, but of course, we need to check if the API client is defined. But it is in this case.
No logging of exception.
Exactly. This is probably the most problematic issue. We're just ignoring the exception. So if API client is not working at the time and it works in 2 minutes, it's okay. But if really nothing works and clients call you, well, this device is not working, and you say, okay, send us the logs. They will send you the logs, and there's nothing. What can you do in this case? And the client has these devices in some closed network, so you cannot just connect it with a VPN. You need to have 2 hours travel to the customer to find out, okay, this settings went wrong, this is wrong. If you've got this, it could save you like really a lot of time and a lot of troubles. So definitely you need some logging there. But in case, how would you do it? In case you don't want to report some errors, you want just to report a warning if the API client is not there. You can definitely log here just a warning, but the problem is that
you should not catch everything in this case.
Yes, exactly. this catch is there because the API client can fail communication with the server.
There are a lot of the repository is not
Yeah.
available. A lot of problems.
Exactly. So in this case, you can, for example, there can be definitely
Whoa.
more layers of checking, but for example, one thing is that this is some timer callback, and we want to make sure that this will never fail. This will never throw an unhandled exception to the application domain. So the good thing is at least to add the global try catch for the whole method, and just log if something just go to it and pops to the top level. Because this method will be called again in some time, but we just don't want to throw an unexpected unhandled exceptions. And this method inside, if we know there can be problems with the data, we can just catch exception. It can be maybe more like something like this. Just catch some specific type of exception, just log warning, and then continue.
Thomas, why not use this try catch who's inside try before the parent try catch? Because if we will not receive the client from API, the data from API client, there is no reason to log it or store it in some repository, so we can just go out, but like not
There
even
is,
go inside.
there is. I'm not exactly if I get it,
Like
but there's
to move try catch, which is a smaller one, out of the scope of a parent try catch. I think it will be a bit more transparent.
Yeah. In this case, I would. We are just we are creating the method that cannot throw an exception individual. In some cases, if it will throw exception, it will shut down your application because it can be a really unhandled exception on the whole application domain. So I just want to make sure that every exception will do this. And inside of it, I can do whatever I want. In most cases, of course, this should be checked on the callback level, and here I should just do
I mean
something.
just try catch API exception and catch exception, like two catches one by one. I think because this structure is a bit complex from the first side. When you
Yeah.
have one try and several catches, maybe it will be more transparent.
Yeah, this is more like about the structure. In most cases, it would be like something like do something just to make sure it's handled, and then in the nested method. But you are right; it can be done. This is just a safety mechanism that in most cases you need to do some global check. If anything goes wrong, just log something, and then you can do something in the, for example, nested method. Okay, we are going to the readability.
Oh my.
This code, it's never in the production. I just take the code that was written correctly and just flip the switches, flip the if statements. But if you look at this, it does not really look good. It's really hard to read, because if this is wrong, you just need to, at least there are these lines. You just follow the line, argument null exception. So this is just a recommendation. I know this is not something you would do, but you can definitely just fix it by straightening the way how your flow goes through your method, because it just check, if not throw an exception, check, if not throw an exception, check, if something not works, then just return. But if your application gets here, there is only one. It means that all checks has passed, and you can continue to the next one. There is another check, and down here is some code that's really doing something. But reading this code is a little simpler. You are just going from the top to the bottom, because having different branches with the ifs makes it quite complicated to read it. Of course, it's not like don't use if else, definitely not. But you can really see the difference, and it's really nice thing to try to make the flow really simple and really linear. Okay, I've got last example, and it's about and it's about immutable structures. This is one part of the code, and this is from my hobby projects. That's basically some implementation of something based on the torrent protocol, and there is one structure, peer info, or one class that contains information about peers we are communicating with. Basically, it's endpoint, it's computers with running this application, and we can contact them to download the data from them. And this is in application. It's used like 100 times because it's really the center definition, and it's really used almost everywhere. And the defensive approach. One of the defensive approach is that you can start using immutable data structures, which means that that's a structure that cannot change the value. In this case, if we've got something like this, and you've got really use this peer info and pass the peer info to tens of places, and someone will change, for example, this dictionary or change anything in the structure, it can really cause some complex race conditions and problems.
So private set.
Yeah. So yeah, I will just move to. Okay, that's one thing definitely. Having everything private set. There is just setting everything using private set will not. Yeah, read only is one option. But read only means that you cannot change it, but it still change the value if you change the original collection. Currently here I used immutable dictionary because in .NET you've got read-only structures. That means that you cannot change it. But if you've got some source instance, reference to source instance, then you can change it. And immutable collections are really immutable, so you cannot change it in any way. So in this case, I just switch everything to the private setters, do validation of everything, and basically use the immutable dictionary. There is one line here. You can see that I checked a lot of things for a null reference, and I added this check. This check was added there as really the pure instance of defensive programming, because in some cases when I receive the information about other peers in some special format that needs to be deserialized from some protobuf format, in some cases there was problems, there was bugs with the deserialization, and it returns the empty object with a 0 port and 0 information. And sometimes when this happens, it created the object peer info with this endpoint with empty value. So port was 0, IP address was 0, and it really started causing the troubles. I just find out that some other component tried to reach some peer on the port 0, and I didn't know what was going on. And then I find out, okay, there is really instance of the peer info that got 0 port. What's happening? So I just added some check to the constructor. So this means that there cannot be peer info instance that didn't pass this validation. And then when I made this change and started the program again, when this error occurred again, it directly created and shown the argument exception and went exactly in the place and with the call stack of site where this happened when the deserialization with 0 port happened.
So shouldn't be it in the logic of instantiating of endpoint IP endpoint?
Well, it can be, but it's the internal structure of .NET, and it supports having 0 port.
Okay.
Just in this context, it should not be there.
Okay.
And from this, I went to another step, and I created the validation on the serialization of the objects and validation on serialization of the objects. So later that I found that the problem was really on serialization, because I've got some logging that show me that to the serialization the port was set, but after the serialization it was 0. So that was the way how I find the exception, and having the validations on a lot of different places helped me to track this down. Okay, so that's just some general recommendations, just some samples, and I'll get just some recapitulation. So do not trust input, but try to do not overuse it. You can always do like, if this is null, if this is null, if this is null, you can do it all the time. Just try to do it where it makes sense, where it can cause the troubles. Just imagine what happens if the value was really null. What happens there? Will it be passed to another component? Will it cause some troubles? Just think about it and try to find the great balance between not checking everything and checking everything. Definitely, something that you can do is hiding exception. If you don't want user to be affected by exception, just plug it and do some repair mechanism. For example, just instead of failing, just use some empty collection or show some message, but do not just catch it and ignore it. That can cause lot of troubles. At least log it. There is no metrics how you can find that it's too much or too little. Just try to find the balance, and it can work with you. It can work for you better. If you are reading the code and you start reading the method and you can see that, okay, this parameter in the constructor cannot be null, you know that you can rely it will be always null. I know it's it's not like trusting the inputs, but at least you can have some parts of the system that you can really trust because it's validated, and it can really help you to manage larger systems. And one really important thing is try to provide predictable behavior of your components. Never try to do something, if this will fail, just do this, just try to do this, just do something that maybe can help, but in most cases it will not help until you really test it, until you really document it, until it's something predictable. If you, for example, look on some really it can be some protocols. If you look at some really complex and used protocols, in most cases, the specification and definition how it works is as simple as possible. There are not many like, okay, if this will not happen, we will just do this, just to try to fix it. If there is some self-repair mechanism, is well documented, well tested, and it's really part of the specification. And the last thing, try to write clean code, because it's easy to understand, easy to extend, easy to fix. That's if you want to definitely try to look at the solid principles, which should help you to write clean and testable code, which is also easier to understand. Because typical case is if you are looking to new code and you are looking to some class, and this class is isolated, inputs are validated, and you are using components that are done the same, it's definitely easy to just tell, okay, we are inside here, and just to map what's going on, how the component interacts with the rest of the system. Because if you've got like static properties everywhere, just calling a lot of static methods, it's really hard to understand what's going on in the system and where's the potential bugs and how to extend it. Okay, you said it. Okay, yes. So thank you very much. Enjoy the weekend.